My name is Dr. G. Welcome to That's Unusual, my podcast uncovering the unusual stories behind the world's most interesting people. On this show, we celebrate what makes us different and how we convert those differences into unexpected opportunities. Welcome to this week's episode of That's Unusual. A big thanks to the thousands of subscribers who have subscribed to this podcast. If you have not done so yet, I would love it if you go to iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher and subscribe today. And while there, leave me a review. It helps me out a great deal. My guest today is Dr. Milena Adamian, a cardiologist turned venture investor who hustled her way to the top. As the founding member of Azimuth Ventures and Life Sciences Angel Network, Milena knows a thing or two about what it takes to succeed as both a health investor and entrepreneur. On this episode, Milena shares what it was like to make the transition from a practicing physician to an investor. We also explore the key qualities of what it takes to succeed as an entrepreneur. We discuss the evolving landscape of healthcare investing and delve into what it's like being both a female and immigrant in a predominantly white, male-driven industry. As you listen to this episode, I ask that you reflect on your own unusual stories and unique qualities that can help open doors to unexpected opportunities. And so with that, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of That's Unusual. Today I have with me as a guest Dr. Milena Adamian. Welcome to the show, Milena.
Thank you, Gautam. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So great to catch up with you. It's been several years since you and I have connected. And I've always been fascinated about your trajectory and your journey because, like myself, you're a physician who has somewhat gone off the beaten path and sort of pursued and carved out a career of your own. Of course, you're of Russian descent, coming into this country as a physician and now turned investor. That journey always fascinates me in terms of how people have really identified what resonates with them and then carve out their own pathway forward. Can you take us a little bit back and, tell us about your journey as, first off, coming to this country or as an immigrant and, going from a cardiologist to investor?
Sure. But there is one difference here. I didn't come to this country as an immigrant, actually. Mm-hmm. I came here as a what you call national interest visa or something like that, outstanding professor. And so that was a category by which I was invited to come and join a really incredible institution in New York. And that's how it started. I have to admit that, yes, the journey has been pretty long, but it never meant to be an immigration. Yes, it started actually, I've traveled so many countries. I've actually lived in quite a few countries. And we can go back to that story, but the truth is that what brought me to New York and what happened to me when I left Russia, I didn't leave it because it was bad or it was in 1996 when I left Russia, it was about learning and seeing an opportunity to learn and do something in a much more appropriate and better way. So I was fascinated when I saw my first departure was actually from Moscow to Milan where I happened to be on a personal reason. You're going to love this story because it is unusual. While I was practicing cardiologist at one of the best cardiovascular centers in Moscow, my father, who still is actually, who was relatively young, at the age of 48, had a heart attack. And so, the question was, do you treat them there? Do you do angioplasty? Or you kind of think about something else? So that was my dad's health. And I was in the middle of writing my PhD thesis alongside with practicing. And I said, you know what? I don't care if I'm going to be fired. I contacted a group in Milan who was one of the best known groups in Milan. I said, hey, this is my dad, it's his health, and can we come for an angioplasty? And then when this whole thing happened, and when this shock is over, I looked around in that cath lab, and I saw physicians running around with those sparkles in their eyes, and they were practicing and they were writing papers, and there was no question who's going to be the first author when you actually happen to write a scientific paper. So basically, very opportunistically, when my dad was already fine, I came toward that famous Dr. Colombo I quote in every single piece that I have a chance to. And I said, can I come and volunteer here just for 3 months? I wanted to learn how they do things in a way that it's a advancing science and care of a patient. And also, it's also motivating for a young physician. And I thought I'm going to go back, but so I came to Milan 3 months later to volunteer for 3 months. And I stayed there for 3 years. After which, that was New York, and that's it. I've been here for almost 20 years.
And so what took you from Milan to New York ultimately, and you've been here since, correct? Or have you gone anywhere in between?
Yeah, since the name of your podcast is Unusuals, I'll tell you that I think what makes all of us, I don't know if you call it unusual, it's the ability or desire to learn, continuously learn, right? And so that's what took me from Milan to New York. It's the natural curiosity. And it wasn't a FOMO, right? It wasn't a FOMO for sure. I thought I was still young enough to try it and to see. And if it wouldn't work, I would go back. But I thought, wow.
Well, an opportunity presented itself, and true to yourself is you take advantage of those opportunities. Unusual, you're correct. Unusual is how we define things. People who do things that break from the norm, right? Who aren't afraid to do things slightly differently. And I think you certainly fall into that category. So when you came to the States, did you practice medicine at all, or was that sort of your, journey into pursuing other things?
Oh, no, it was, medicine was there until 2003. And so it's, if you have to define, again, speaking of unusuals, and I love the name of your podcast, speaking of unusuals, it's not only about, seeing an opportunity, but also understanding that you're, could you do it? If the opportunity to present yourself, can you actually make it work? Is it worth pursuing, right? Because there are opportunities that we kind of see along our lifetime, but are they all of them worth pursuing? Probably not, right? Yes, I was here. And actually, speaking of breaking rules, that's one of my favorite things to do, right? So,
that's why we have you on.
Yeah. So, back in 2003, making a transition from physician to going to Boston Scientific, you have to have some, guts to do that, right? It wasn't that common. It became a little more common after, several years later, but it wasn't that common because you kind of, my mentors at Lenox Hill were not, some of them stopped talking to me for a while. They were like, oh, you betrayed us. It was almost like a betrayal. Then the others would go, you went to a dark side. It wasn't a dark side. It was an opportunity for me specifically, having my mind always open. I thought, wow, I can actually contribute to a program that will bring drug-eluting stents. And back then, that was a big deal. That was only Johnson & Johnson, who was ahead of Boston Scientific, to bring drug-eluting stents, a life-saving technology, to patients on a much larger scale. And I can be part of that journey. Hell yeah. That was my kind of, my transition to Boston Scientific. So it wasn't just, I'll just want to go there for a nice cushy job and have lunches. And so it still wasn't like that. I was part of the group, and I'm very proud that was a part of my career.
Yeah, I recall that time period, and that was about the time when I started venturing out into other areas as well. And it was a very different time back then, even though it was just 15, 20 years ago. A lot of things were looked down upon or frowned upon if you were a physician interested in other things. The way I see it, though, is that you almost had foresight in terms of the way healthcare needed to undergo a fundamental shift, and you wanted to be part of that wave and part of that, taking advantage of those opportunities that were going to be coming down the pike. Certainly for me, I'd saw that healthcare was shifting dramatically around that time. You could make a choice of living in that world and being a part of the problem that was ensuing, or be a part of the solution going forward, which was more fascinating for me. So tell me, so you went to Boston Scientific, and that was sort of your first, and that's a huge, for those listening, that's a huge leap, going from physician into something that, is a whole different world with a whole different set of skills. What did you learn in that process? Did you consider coming back into the practice of medicine, or were you basically convinced that this was the path that you wanted to take?
What I've learned in the process, and I love the way you describe it, actually, process, right? Because it is process. In the beginning of the process, I thought, I want to become a chief medical officer for that big corporation at some point, right? And then 3 years down the road, when I've learned a lot about what it actually takes to bring a product like this to the market, I realized, yes, I like that part, but I don't like the part of being a very big organization. And so at the year 3 or something like this, I started to think, okay, so what's going to be next? And I've learned in the process, I've learned about venture capital. I've learned more about startups coming startups coming to Boston Scientific to kind of to fill the pipeline, to fill the gap, to expand their, kind of product line, if you will, right? Or offering to patients. And I thought, wow, there is some other world that is even more interesting than a big corporation. And that is either venture capital group or a startup. And that's what I was thinking at Boston, actually. I was thinking to make it basically a transition to one of those entities. And I ended up in venture because this way I could have seen a lot more startups than just being part of it, which again, it's being now reevaluated as we speak. But I would just say that it was an amazing transition.
So you're really interested in sort of the process about how an idea goes from an idea into an operating business and grows from there, and sort of getting behind the scenes with that. Making the leap into venture capital, I mean, I bet you sort of skipped a number of different steps in there, because that's not an easy transition, right? I mean, there's so many people vying for positions in venture capital who, if you don't have operational experience in running a company itself, is difficult to break into. Now, granted, you had the advantage of being a physician and having a different perspective of many, but how did you sort of get yourself into that space? I mean, from what I had met, you were always a big hustler and would always try to make deals and build relationships. How did that process work for you?
Which one?
I think when we had met, you were part of the Life Sciences Angel Network, and sort of getting your hands and feet wet in terms of getting familiar with the venture investment world. What was that? What was that process like?
No. It's actually, we have to step back. So I joined the venture fund in New York. It was a well-established fund called Easton Capital, ESTON Capital, back in 2007. So I was part of a well-established fund back in 2000. Yeah. And so in 2010 or 2011, actually, when you and I met, I put together Life Sciences Angel Network as a result of, again, it's all my life has been going from one challenge to another, just solving them, and then kind of the moment I get a little more comfortable, I have to kind of make myself uncomfortable again. And so that's, I guess, my favorite modus operandi. So I was part of a fund in New York for several years. I ran our office out of California. And then when I happened to live for 3 years. And then when we came to New York, that was 2010. And there was absolutely, speaking of opportunity, seeing an opportunity. As you remember, there was absolutely no money for early stage companies. New York has always had that problem. It's not Valley, you know that. And there weren't any quality opportunities in healthcare. And we've seen this kind of I have seen this up and coming trend of what you would call a process improvement over the product improvement, and what people call health IT, basically technology driven solutions to healthcare. And I thought this is an amazing opportunity to do something. So I started that group from nothing. And this group continues to be active, and we continue to invest. As a matter of fact, this week we have our next meeting. So it has been a great way to establish, basically to prove probably to myself as well, that I can create my own track record. I can pick my own companies. And all of those companies that we invested, I sourced myself. I did a lot of work on them. And some of them came because of the relationships that I had before.
Now, I mean, the venture world is typically known for being very male dominated. What was the experience like in sort of going head first as a female into that venture capital world?
I don't care. I mean, I always has been in a male dominated world. No. I just don't think you should be evaluated by female. Is there a problem for women investors? Absolutely. I mean, but there are problems for females everywhere. Wherever you walk in, you always are in a slightly disadvantageous position. One, because you have to be really, you're being evaluated by performance versus the expectations of it for the male. It's true. And so you have to be a little bit ahead of your male counterpart to just wow them somehow. And that's basically, that's the truth. Well, I mean,
part of the controversy and argument was the fact that, because venture capital is predominantly male dominated, that they tend to invest in companies that also are male driven or male run, which is basically excluding almost, 50% or more of the population of opportunities out there. And I feel like, having more women run venture funds is very critical in terms of getting the right businesses out into the marketplace. So, I mean, just my perspective and sort of looking at it from the outside, I'd like to see more of that. And really, hats off to you for going out and creating it. So what took you down? So are you currently running Azimuth Ventures, correct?
Yep. And the LSAT.
And the Life Sciences Angel Network. So tell me about the difference between the two, and when did you start Azimuth, and what was required to build out that venture fund?
Azimuth came as, if you talk in venture capital terms, LSAN was Series Seed as my own company. And then Azimuth was Series A, Series A. If you're talking in that progression. But basically, so they invested in a lot of companies side by side. Azimuth came as a result of what has been proven at LSAN, a good portfolio, great companies, amazing people, part of that group and part of both as entrepreneurs, part of portfolio, and as investors. So that was a natural kind of progression of a disease, if you will, right? Azimuth came as a result of LSAN. And there's definitely plans going forward. So has
Azimuth created a sort of a follow-on investment fund to those that were made from LSAN, or does it invest in companies entirely different?
Both. It does both. It invests side by side. It's a follow-on opportunity, which I think it's inevitably is going to come into minds of investors that it's good to have. And a lot of them already doing that formally or informally. Yeah. They have this kind of a seed-ish programs, right? Or allocations. And then you come in later when you see how the company is doing.
So let's dig into the healthcare marketplace for a second here, because I think, just from a physician to physician perspective here, I think we have a different lens on how the environment is shaping. So you've been a part of the venture community for 10 plus years now. A lot has changed in 10 years, right? What have you seen since the 2007 days of you first getting involved with the venture world compared to what you're seeing today in healthcare?
So in 2007, I was a medtech investor, pure medical devices. The idea of services would not cross my mind. What happened between 2007 and 2017, it's actually a very pleasant change. The results will have to be defined. I would quote Shakespeare here saying, isn't it strange that desire should so many years outlive performance, right? So that's a question that is applicable to a lot of healthcare investments in general. So what happened between 2007 and 2017 is inevitable intervention in a good way of technology into healthcare. And I'm talking about traditional science-driven solutions to treat specific disease or entity of a disease. I'm talking about the processes that have been extremely old and they still are, right? And technology coming to solve those problems, right? So back in 2010, it was obvious that even medical device companies or the shift in healthcare will have to happen in a way that you don't just sell a product, right? But you sell a service. You want to stay engaged with your patient one way or the other. So there are a lot of things that, both on, the regulatory side, on a technology side that enabled those changes. And I'm looking forward to see what's going to come out of that. Hopefully, if you look at the report, I think it was a last year report on technology penetration in various industries and verticals, healthcare is just 25% penetrated by technology solutions, which is just very close to government and stuff like that. So
I'd be surprised if it's even that much. That seems pretty by itself. Yeah.
I'd probably someone exaggerated a little bit, but it's really, there is a lot to do. That's what it means. But also, I don't want to distract you from that, but there are also other things that life is pretty simple. And every time when someone tries to complicate things and come up with some extremely complex solution, I don't know if it's going to work. You have to be able to explain it. When the companies come to us, right, and give their pitch or tell their story, because I really hate the word pitch. So I usually ask 3 questions: who, why, and how. Who's going to buy it? How are you going to sell it? And who's going to pay for it? If you can identify all these 3 questions to me, then there is a very viable chance that there is a business that will come out of this.
Yeah, those are great 3 questions here. I want to probe in a little bit more specific here, because I think you provide a unique perspective that a lot of other VCs may not be able to. So, there was this sort of, a lot of interest in sort of non-healthcare folks coming into the healthcare world, identifying a problem, and then trying to create a solution around it. From your perspective, looking at those who are non-healthcare founders, or they have no healthcare expertise, but maybe expertise in building companies, building out healthcare companies. And then you have those who are healthcare experts, maybe ex-physicians who are now building out healthcare companies. Do you see a difference in those two in today's world? Does one have an advantage over the other?
I mean, I can tell you from what I've seen in the last close to 7 years, a lot of our companies, I would say about 60% of our companies right now in my portfolio companies are what you would call technology-enabled healthcare solutions. And big chunk, a big percent of follow-on investors are also technology investors after our seed rounds, right? So what I would say that having a technology entrepreneur, it's always fascinating. I always want to marry those qualities. I want to marry the enthusiasm and energy with the scars and a bit of a gray hair or no hair of those who know healthcare. It's impossible. I mean, those are mistakes that are being repeated over and over again. And I think a lot of technology entrepreneurs going into healthcare think it's as easy to create a solution as you would, you just build something and just start selling it.
Like in a consumer world, right, which is completely different.
And then some of them learn, right? Some of them learn in a harsh way. Some of them learn early on, and some of them don't. And I think this is the big problem, right? Because you see money flowing freely into those companies, right? Everyone wants to disrupt healthcare. And when you ask, like, what are you actually disrupting, right? Can you please explain me what are you actually trying to do? They can't explain. And that's the problem. I think the best combination is, in my advice for those technology entrepreneurs, people coming from the technology side to solve those problems. I admire that, right? But you have to pair, you have to bring up your counterpart who can help you to identify what is exactly what you want to improve, solve for. You just can't do it by yourself, or you just come and just, Yeah,
I like that notion of pairing the two up, because on the one hand, the tech founder who is more consumer oriented sort of brings this element of naivety and I can do anything attitude in a space and let's disrupt it. But then they ultimately realize that they don't understand the intricacies of healthcare. On the flip side, the healthcare expert founder, if we were to call it that, comes with a lot of baggage and a lot of assumptions that ultimately need to be broken. But I think putting two of those minds in the room together certainly can create magic.
It's absolutely, because look, technology, I've seen it over and over now in some of our companies, right? It's a terrific enthusiasm, but this is not a technology company. You always have to realize this, whatever is being created, most of them are technology tools or technology enabled solutions for healthcare, right? And so as such, if you are solving a problem in healthcare or in services, in care, access, delivery, or whatever, you have to speak the same language as your customers. And your customers are not the same guys from, Carnegie Mellon or, some other great technology school, right? It has to be done in parallel. So you have to have someone who is as credible as your technology investor in healthcare to help you to execute, because your customer is a hospital, a physician, a health system, a health plan, or, pharmaceutical company, etc.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a lot of the accelerators try to go down that route, trying to assist with helping getting into some of the customers that they need, because those are sort of difficult to penetrate. I want to bring up another issue here that was recent. Jay Parkinson, who, are you familiar with Jay, who's the founder of Sherpa?
Yes.
He recently wrote an article, I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but I can describe it, talking about his sort of divorce from venture capital, because there's a mismatch in terms of the expectations between a startup company in healthcare and what a venture capital fund is looking to achieve, which is, some sort of exit strategy within a 7 to 10 year time frame. And oftentimes healthcare startups are much slower in growth and are much more driven sort of on the long tail. Do you see that there's a little bit of a shakeout going here, where there's a mismatch in terms of what types of companies are best suited for venture capital in the healthcare space versus those which are not?
You know what is interesting? It's a very interesting question, and I have been actually thinking for quite some time recently. Not all companies have to be funded by venture capital, and not all companies have to be a lot more businesses out there in America or across the world are actually businesses that are run as businesses, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is not the motivation or the incentive for someone who runs that business versus a pure performance metric for venture capitalists are very different, right? And while there is absolutely nothing wrong running a company as a business, when you go down the path of taking money from venture capital, then get ready that you will be asked. So when are you planning to exit? What is your exit strategy? Who will be interested in, let's say, merging with you and why, right? But I agree with Jay that you don't have to. I mean, so there are a lot of businesses in this country that run, I mean, from little, barbershops to a big family office. I'm sorry, family office, to a big family enterprises that are, and these are absolutely amazing businesses. No one really...
Yeah, because it's really hard for some of these companies to achieve the 10x. That's what, a lot of venture capital funds have sort of set as their expectations.
Please. I mean, show me there is a handful of those who actually do 10x.
Right.
Please, let's just not blow it out of proportion. Okay.
Yes, I mean, so I clip, the world of life sciences and biopharmaceuticals and medical devices certainly makes sense historically, has always been invested historically from large investors. This health tech world, I would love to see just a lot more people really hustling and creating a business model from the ground up without necessarily requiring venture capital investment. Something that, it's almost like a badge of honor to get venture capital investment these days that oftentimes is to their detriment down the road that results in their failure. So it's sort of the striking this fine balance. And I think we're starting to see a lot of that shakeup occur today, which for me is really exciting to see because we're starting to see real value come through versus just the, sort of the Me Too players in the marketplace. Based on some of the investments and things that you're seeing, what excites you about the future?
Well, I'll tell you that what excites me about the future is the future, actually. Is the future, the fact that things are moving in the right direction. As a healthcare investors, I mean, this is a fundamental difference from investors in any other area. You have to be patient. And again, this is going back to your question about naivete of technology founders, or I would say even more so to naivete of technology investors. Absolutely. It's very unusual to have an exit, if you're talking about venture capital funded companies, an exit that is desired, something like YouTube exit or something like that in a short time period. Most likely, the multiples are going to be lower, and the time to exit is going to be higher. But this is going to advance things forward, and those are things. Not everyone needs a Snapchat, probably, right? But everyone needs good care, and will be facing some kind of a condition himself or herself, or or family members that will have to be solved. And I think that's the fundamental thing why investments in healthcare will continue to be there, regardless of the economy cycles and all of that, because you're solving a real problem, a real need that needs to be solved for.
Yeah. Do you think venture capital needs to have a little bit of a shakeup in terms of their own business model? And we're starting to see crowdfunding and equity, equity funding from these consumer-oriented platforms. But is the model fundamentally going to stay looking for roughly an exit 7 to 10 years from, returning to your limited partners and so forth? Or are we going to start to see healthcare-focused venture funds maybe extending that to 15, 20-year time periods and looking at sort of different models around it?
Well, you're talking now, I mean, this is a conversation turning into asset management, right? Because 15, 20 years, it's a ridiculous amount of time, right? And you can almost do it all, like as a non-for-profit organization and fund those initiatives and companies for the development, build them. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's great. In terms of shake-up in venture capital, I mean, I think it's a long overdue. And I'm talking about the business model. I'm pretty sure someone needs to sit down and look at those numbers. It's incredibly conservative. It's cookie cutter. It's the same. And if you go actually to pitch your fund to or your prospective LPs, there is a set of check marks that everyone is looking to, that haven't changed in 20 years probably. And that has to change as well, right? So I'm pretty sure it'd be very interesting to see the dynamics of the business model and venture changing. Mm-hmm. That would be very interesting to see.
So what kinds of, looking back at all of the entrepreneurs that you've mentored and advised over the years, what are some core pieces of advice that you would share with them?
Know your customer. Mm-hmm. And that means it's not, I mean, again, by no means it's just the consumer thing. I would say that since most of the entrepreneurs we funded were technology, came from technology world, which was very unusual, again, even for me, I thought that learning about the industry where you're trying to get into or you're trying to improve would be fundamental. Just learning about the subject that you're trying to, work on or problem to solve for. Mm-hmm. A lot of them think that, we'll just come in, we'll get our, first seed, 3 million in seed and then another, 20 in A, and then we'll just get going. It doesn't work this way, right? So learn about the industry you're trying to understand. Bring people who have done things there, who can share their experience with you. Listen, synthesize, and do the way you think you should be doing, because that's your company. That would be my advice.
That's great. Before we get into sort of the rapid fire Mad Lib fill in the blank lightning round here, what's the next chapter for you? Do you see cardiology and coming into practice again in the future, or you're just going to take advantage of the next opportunity that comes your way?
No, the train has left station. I'm not going. Would you go back? Here's my question.
At this point, no, I'm having way too much fun. I never say no to that because I do love the practice of medicine. It's not something that I left because I was frustrated with. It's something I left because I just saw greater opportunity and more fun doing other things that took advantage of me being a physician. But I'd never say no to it. I mean, there's always a delight in practicing medicine, whether it be part-time or having your fee. The problem is the stuff that you and I do, Milena, is you can't go half in, half out, right? You got to go all in.
Right. No, I mean, I'm with you on this one. And the opportunities and in the challenges solving kind of mode is what I like, what I prefer in my life. And I don't think I'm going to go back to just routine practice, not my thing, right? But, I mean, I always say, and I will continue to say that every time I have a chance, that if I had to start off my career again, I would still go to medicine. I would still become a doctor. I became a doctor not because I wanted to have a safe and, conservative income or something like that. No. When I went to medical school not in this part of the world, and my motivation was I really wanted to help people. I really wanted to, because being a doctor, it's an honorable, it's an honor actually, right? You're not just helping, but you're becoming almost like a psychologist to your patient. It's more just treating a physical illness. So it was an amazing experience that, kind of set the foundation for the rest of the opportunities. What's next? We'll have to see. I mean, I can tell you that more and more I'm thinking about, kind of trying to combine all those challenges that I had to solve through my career, which is, first understanding how you bring big, really revolutionary treatments to the world, and being very proud of being part of those achievements. Speaking of Boston Scientific, right? Trying to understand how the industry thinks about it. You don't know that I was also on the equity side, sell-side analyst at Lehman Brothers. That was part of my career before going to venture, because I really wanted to understand how the industry thinks and what is behind those P&L numbers. Yeah. So I actually had to go and get certification as an equity analyst in medical devices and supplies. So I've seen all parts of it. And my question now, kind of looking at venture, is it okay to be a spectator? Because as a venture investor, you're still a spectator, even though you try to connect those dots and help your companies early on. Or am I ready to do something much more bigger? Hands-on. Yeah, more hands-on, something on a larger scale with more resources. That's where I'm kind of evaluating right now.
Well, I'm looking forward to following that path, because everything that you do is always exciting to follow. And you've always got great advice along the way. So I think this is sort of a nice little segue into the fun segment of our conversation here, which is a rapid fire Mad Lib questions here. So if you're up for it, let's jump into those.
Let's go.
Okay, so you gave some good advice to others and entrepreneurs coming down the pike, but this question is more about you. So the best piece of advice that I ever received was?
Never give up.
Never give up. All right, good piece of advice. All right, the next one. I am most curious about?
About everything. I can't really tell you exactly what it is, but I'm curious about everything, starting from new technologies to the most recent fashion blogs. I mean, take it from there.
All right, great. So everything. Yes, that's all on the plate for you. Looking back, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
I mean, I would say, just keep going, be resilient. Always try to get an advice from people you look up for, and never settle on something that you are not happy about. You're going to find yourself miserable later on. So I've never did that. Yeah.
That's a very important piece of advice. Don't live other people's expectations of you, but live yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next one for you. If you had to write a book about yourself, essentially an autobiography, the title of the book would be?
I would prefer that someone else, that my friends, my colleagues, my family would write a book about myself. How's that?
That's fine. What would the title be? If they were to write a book about you.
One of our friends called me a badass with a heart. I would like that to go in a title.
That's great. Love it. Okay, if you could invite 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would you invite and what would you want to talk about?
All right. So the first would be for the number one, it would be a couple. Can I do that? So, I can tell you that I've been fascinated for many years by Bill and Melinda Gates.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you. So it's amazing what they have been able to create, to see that you could see the global impact by science-driven solutions in their lifetime. There are very few people who can see that, who can do that. And I would have loved to have a dinner with them. Mm-hmm. If I lived in Seattle, I can tell you, I'd go and work for them as an associate just to learn about the culture of organization and what makes them so unique in solving simple but yet incredibly impactful problems, right? There is also another angle, very important angle to it. It's the union between those two independent, intelligent people who happen to be married, and they're doing it exceptionally well together. So that's another lesson to be kind of portrayed to the rest of to a younger generation, to see things like that work.
Yeah.
So second person to have a dinner would be Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
I just love that man. It would be a funny dinner. I can only imagine. And the third one would be Roberto Benigni. I don't know if you know him. He's probably mostly. People in the United States would probably know him as a film director for The Life is Beautiful. It's an Italian film director. Yeah. He is both incredibly educated, hilarious, and he's Italian. He can learn people about the life that is, again, very simple and has to be enjoyed every moment of it.
That's great. I like that combination. That would definitely be an interesting dinner conversation there. Last one for you, Milena. So, of course, on this podcast, we celebrate everything that makes us unique, different, how we break rules. We call this unusual. So if you had to fill in the blank, how would you do so? I'm unusual because...
I am unusual because I have been on Gautam's podcast.
You're first for that, so I love that one. Great. That's a perfect way to finish this off. Thank you, Milena. It's such a delight catching up with you. But before we close out, if those listening wanted to find out more information about you, about some of the work that you're up to, about your venture capital firm, where would you direct them to go?
I would direct them to go to LinkedIn.
Okay.
It's Milena Adamian. It's very easy to find. Or, I think that's the best way. I mean, there are websites of, Azimuth and Elsan is there. Elsan needs to be updated. So, but nevertheless, I mean, LinkedIn and Azimuth websites would be the best. But you can always get in touch with me. Great.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much, Milena. It was a delight talking to you.
Thank you.
Hi again, it's me, Dr. G. If you are still listening, I'm hoping it's because you enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear future episodes, you could really help me out by subscribing to the That's Unusual podcast on iTunes and leaving a review. It goes a long way in helping me get the word out from avid listeners like you. As a thank you, I will be selecting one new reviewer each week at random for a free private 15-minute phone conversation where you can ask me anything and get professional advice on your career or business to help you stand out and make a difference. Also, if you want to be notified of any future episodes, please visit that'sunusualpodcast.com and sign up to receive updates on new episode releases. Until next time, remember to always think unusual.